life in that rabbit hole, and you will die in that rabbit hole because it never ends. That's like the basic characteristics of a rabbit hole. You can use this phrase to describe an activity that just takes you down an alley that goes on forever. So for instance, let's say I'm a big fan of coffee. Okay, I am a big fan of coffee. And if I decided to research methods of making coffee on the internet, that's a total rabbit hole. Like I would sit down one day and type in methods of making coffee. And I would wake up like 4 days later saying, where am I? What's happening? Because that's a total rabbit hole. It goes on forever. Like, oh, that's an interesting link. Okay, let's click that. And it just goes on forever. It's a total rabbit hole, right? So you can use this to warn somebody. Like if somebody says, I'm going to investigate this and this. You're like, man, it's a total rabbit hole. Don't do it. Because like it'll never end. You'll just become, immersed in this thing. So, all right. And so that's the first one. And the second one is copyright. And we know what copyright is. But just in case, what's copyright for? What's the point of? Yep, of intellectual property. Exactly. It's a way to protect your intellectual property. So if you're a creator, if you create art or whatever, basically, you don't want people stealing it from you, right? You want to make sure that it belongs to you, and so there are some things that are easier to copyright than others. For instance, literature or music are pretty easy to copyright. If you write a song or if you write a book, you can prove that you wrote it, right? Because no one can come up with the same idea independently. That's just not going to happen. Okay, it's your idea. You can prove it. And if you have copyright and somebody copies this thing, you can sue them. You can take them to court. So that's books and music. Then there are things that are trickier and less clear-cut. For instance, encyclopedias. You know what encyclopedias are? Like big books full of facts, right? Encyclopedias. Or dictionaries, right? In English, a dictionary that explains the definitions of words, right? Or maps, for instance. Because these things, encyclopedias, dictionaries, and maps, describe things that are out there for everyone to see. So the definition of a word is the same for you as it is for me, as it is for everybody else. A map is the same for everybody. So if I decide to create an encyclopedia or a dictionary, and then when I'm done, I publish it, and somebody else just takes the whole thing and slaps their name on it and sells it, it's going to be very hard for me to prove that I created it. Because they're going to say, hey, it's the same words. I mean, we have the same definitions. How can you prove that you actually created this? So over time, people have come up with very clever ways of making sure that their work doesn't get stolen. And one of these ways is to insert a false piece of information into your work. So for instance, if you create a dictionary, it's like a thick book full of words, and one of the words you'll just make up. It doesn't exist. You'll just create a word that doesn't exist. And you put it in there, like page 347. And you will create a word that looks real, but it isn't, right? And then you wait. And if the same word pops up somewhere else, you're like, gotcha. You copied it. So it's kind of sneaky, but it works. This is like the only way, practically, that you can catch thieves or copycats if you're in this line of work. So for instance, in 1975, there was a new edition of New Columbia Encyclopedia, a huge book. And there was an entry in it for Lillian Virginia Moundweasel, an American photographer who became famous for taking pictures of American mailboxes. Like she took pictures of mailboxes outside of people's houses, like the most boring thing that there is. And she had a huge collection of these pictures. She had exhibitions. And then she died in a fiery explosion when her house blew up. Right? So there's an entry for her, except she never existed. Okay, this woman never existed. It was a trap, to catch potential thieves. And a few years later, there was a dictionary, and it had the word esquivalence in it, which sounds like a real word. It looks like a real word from Latin.